Hey guys, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Becca and today I have a mid-February wrap up. Mid-month wrap-ups are something that I used to do on my channel. I started doing them early to mid 2019. However, towards the end of the year, I wasn't reading quite as much and so there was no need for me to do them anymore. However, at the time of filming this, we are approaching the middle of February and I have already finished 5 books. Now, if you guys have been with me for a while, you will know that when I do my wrap-ups or when I review books, depending on what the book is and how I felt about it, I can be speaking on that book for quite some time. And so I am reintroducing mid-month wrap-ups to my channel. I will obviously only be doing these in the months where I have read enough at the midpoint of the month to be worth making one of these videos, and as they were previously on my channel, the mid-month wrap-ups will not contain my reading statistics like my end-of-month wrap-ups normally do. All of those stats will come in my wrap-up at the end of the month. So heading straight into the wrap-up, the first book that I finished in February was Catching Fire by Suzanne Collins. This is the second book in the Hunger Games trilogy, which I'm sure you guys know is a young adult dystopian series that follows Katniss Everdeen. This series takes place in a world that is separated into areas. The center of these areas, or the ruler of these areas, is called the capital, and every other area is a numbered district. Now, Katniss comes from District 12, which is known for its mining, and every year in this world, the capital makes every person under 18 put their name into a bowl, and in every district, the name of one boy and one girl is pulled out of these bowls, and they will be sent to an arena to fight to the death. Now, this book was a reread for me. I read this series in its entirety when I was 18, I believe, and I really loved this series back then. It was one of my favorite series for a very long time, and Catching Fire is, or was or is, I'm not sure, my favorite book in the series. Now, there are a couple of series I have read in the past that I don't think that I will ever reread because I want to preserve the nostalgia and I don't think they'll stand up to the test of time, Twilight being one of them. However, I did not think The Hunger Games was going to be one of those series for me, but unfortunately it is, and I just don't really like these books anymore, and I kind of wish I'd never started rereading the series. So when I was reading this, I was trying to decide whether I was going to leave my rating at the original rating that I gave it when I was 18. However, I didn't have Goodreads then, so I realized that there was never a rating to preserve, and I did give this 3 stars. Now, this series will always hold a special place in my heart. I do really love the plot in this series. I really love the world. This book specifically has some of my favorite characters in it, such as Finnick and Joanna. I also really love Haymitch and Effie. Don't like Katniss and have never liked Katniss, which somebody said to me in one of my reading vlogs is an unpopular opinion. I kind of assumed that nobody really liked Katniss, to be honest, but yeah, she's not one of my favorite characters. I've never really got on with her, but there are a lot of things about this book and this series that I do enjoy. Another one of those things would be the arena situation in this book and the whole idea surrounding that, as well as the actual very small chunk of the book that takes place in that arena. But there are also a lot of things about this book that I just really don't like. I don't really like Suzanne Collins' writing. It's very plain and very to the point. There's not a lot of description in here. There's not a lot of embellishment. It's no way a descriptive writing style at all, which is not my personal favorite. It has worked for me in the past for some books, such as the Arc of a Side series. Combining that writing style with the pacing of this book, and I was just annoyed for most of my time reading this. So my issue with the pacing is that it seems that Suzanne Collins focuses on things that don't matter, or things that are less exciting, should I say, and draws them out for a very long time and then glosses over the more interesting aspects of the book, the world, the plot. There is a glaring example of that in Mockingjay, which everybody brings up, where a character does die and it happens really quickly and it's just glossed right over. But it happens with a lot of things throughout all of the series. The first 200 or so pages of this book mainly focus on Katniss's inner monologue, which, to be honest, drives me insane to start off with. And during those 200 pages, there are things happening, like the victory tour happens. However, using the example of the victory tour, there are pretty much only 2 scenes throughout the entire victory tour. The rest is completely glossed over. The eventual reaping that comes in this book is half a page, and the actual bulk of the story, the most interesting thing that happens in this book, happens over the last 100 pages of a 475 page book. book. Like I said, the entirety of the beginning of this book is pretty much Katniss's inner monologue, and the issue that I have with her inner monologue is that in my opinion she seems to always be focusing on things that are about to happen as opposed to things that are happening. So instead of reacting to a situation, she will sit and she will think through everything that could possibly happen because of this one thing that happened. To me, that takes time away from the more interesting aspects of this plot, like the victory tour, like the reaping, and that was really frustrating to me when I was reading this. I am going to finish my reread of the series. I may as well reread Mockingjay now, but I think when I have done that, I will not be revisiting this series again, and I'm going to put it with Twilight as a series that I used to really love when I'm younger, but it's not for me anymore. The next 3 books I read for Polathon, which was a 1-week-long readathon that focuses on polar fantasy, hosted by my friend Jade from JD Ray Reads. The first book that I read for that was The Ice Dragon by George R.R. Martin. Now this is a very short little, I'm gonna say it's a children's story. It's for any ages, but this could very easily be read to children, and it is in the style of a fairy tale. So this is very short, it's only 125 pages, and it is illustrated. I flew through this because some of the pages have very little text on them. This is the story of Adara, who was a child that was born in deep winter. Because of this, a lot of people are wary of her. They find her to be different from other children. She's very cold to the touch, and she's a little more reserved than normal children. In this world, there are dragons, and Adara's uncle is a dragon rider for the king, and there is mention of an ongoing war that is on the border of the country where Adara lives and the neighboring country. Also in this world, we have the ice dragon that symbolizes really deep cold. It only turns up in winter, and a lot of people don't really like the ice dragon because winter has a lot of connotations like extreme hunger. So a lot of people do consider the ice dragon a bad omen. However, because Adara was born in winter and because of her affinity with the cold, she does befriend the ice dragon, and when the threat of the war starts to approach her homelands, there is only Adara and her friend the ice dragon that can save them all. I gave this 4 stars. This was really lovely. It is pretty much a fairy tale. I would consider this a modern fairy tale. I mean, it was written in 1980, but the majority of traditional fairy tales were written a long time before that. I don't really have too much to say about this because pretty much all I can say is that it is a fairy tale. I would recommend reading it. This did make me sad at the end, but I really enjoyed the illustrations. I really liked the companionship between Adara and her ice dragon, and overall I think it was really well told. I wish it would have had a happier ending, and I wouldn't have complained if it was longer. I would have read a full book based on this story, but aside from that, I loved it, and I would recommend this if you like more modern fairy tale-esque stories. Next up, I read Wondersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Crow by Jessica Townsend. This is a children's fantasy story and the second book in the Nevermore series. In the first book in this series, we follow Morrigan Crow, who is a cursed child. This means that everything that goes wrong in the town where she lives is blamed on her, and she's also destined to die on the eve of her 11th birthday. Now in this world, they have something called a bid day, where one day a year all of the children gather, and this gives the opportunity for influential people and business owners to bid on these children and to take them as their apprentices. Morrigan is not expecting any bids, 1 because she's a cursed child and nobody likes her, and 2 because she's destined to die very soon. However, Morrigan is very surprised when she actually receives a number of bids, one of which is from a man called Jupiter North. Jupiter then whisks Morrigan away to a city called Nevermore that Morrigan didn't know existed, and there he enters her into a series of trials to gain entry into something called the Wondrous Society. So I really loved the first book in this series. I loved the writing, I really loved the characters, I loved the way that Jessica Townsend can create fantastical things and make them seem completely normal. I felt that everything in Nevermore and also in the sequel felt completely tangible, and Nevermore is a place that I want to go. It is a place that seems like it could be real, even though it would be very well hidden, and I was completely enchanted by the world and mystified by how Jessica Townsend managed to write all of these fantastical elements and make them seem perfectly reasonable. When I went into Wondersmith, I was expecting more of the same, and I wasn't disappointed. This book is just as good as Nevermore. I personally slightly prefer Nevermore. The only reason for that is that Nevermore predominantly takes place in the Deucalion Hotel, which is where Morrigan lives when Jupiter whisks her away. I really really loved the setting of the Deucalion Hotel and all of the characters that live there, especially Fenestra. And while all of those characters are present in this book and Morrigan still lives in the Deucalion Hotel, the main setting of this book is the Wondrous Society, which is an almost magic school type setting. I'm not sure if magic school is the right word, because while they do teach magic there, they teach a whole range of things. They teach fighting styles, they teach languages, magical geography. Pretty much every subject you can think of that may be useful in a really bizarre way is taught at the Wondrous Society. And while I really loved that setting, Morrigan goes through a very tough time in this book, and I have heard this series compared to Harry Potter. I personally didn't get those vibes very much with Nevermore, aside from feeling like Nevermore was a real place, like I remember feeling when I read Harry Potter for the first time. But aside from that, I didn't get too many Harry Potter vibes. In this I did, but mainly through the way that the adults in this world were treating Morrigan, similarly to how some of the teachers at Hogwarts treat Harry with an extreme air of distrust because of his past and him being the chosen one and things like that. So Morrigan was going through a tough time through the majority of this book, and because of this she didn't get to experience the Wondrous Society in a way that I would have liked her to, just for me to also be able to explore everything the Wondrous Society has to offer. However, I do feel like that kind of stuff will play a really big part in Hollowpox, so I'm eagerly anticipating the third book in this series and the remaining 3 or 6 or however many Jessica Townsend eventually publishes. But you guys know me, I don't read a whole lot of children's books and I don't love a whole lot of children's books, but I could probably say that this is my favorite children's series of all time I have read as an adult without any kind of nostalgia tinting it, because I find it extremely well written. The world building is excellent and I love all of the characters, and I very much think and have obviously illustrated that this is a series that adults can also enjoy as well as children. And I don't think I mentioned I gave this 5 stars. The next book I read was The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is a very slow moving, very atmospheric adult fantasy that takes place in Russia. This has a lot of Russian folklore in it. It is very heavily inspired by Russian folklore, and I would also say that this is a historical fantasy. I do really struggle to describe this book because while it does have a plot, Catherine Arden spends a lot of time building up and following our main character Vasilisa, and the majority of this book pretty much follows Vasilisa growing up, the circumstances of her birth, the troubles that she has in childhood and adolescence, and all of this takes place before the plot really starts to kick in. So this book actually starts off before Vasilisa is born. Vasilisa's mother unfortunately dies in childbirth, so Vasilisa grows up under the tutelage of her nurse. As Vasilisa is growing, she is developing a wilder spirit than is okay for women to have in this world, and she enjoys things like climbing trees, going out into the forest, riding horses, and all sorts of activities that are inappropriate for women. Because of this, her father does eventually decide to remarry, and he brings a very religious woman into their household. Now, what we start to find out is that both Vasilisa and her stepmother share a gift, and that is that they are sighted. In this world, there are nature spirits that look after various aspects of the world. For example, we have a lake spirit that looks after the lake, there is one that lives in the hearth that looks after the house, and one that lives in the stables and looks after the horses. Both Vasilisa and her stepmother can see all of these spirits, but as Vasilisa's stepmother is heavily religious and Vasilisa has grown up in the countryside, her stepmother believes that they are demons and is terrified of them, while Vasilisa has grown up with them and speaks to them frequently, leaves them tributes and things like that. Because of her stepmother's extreme religious nature, she begins talking to a priest about the demons that she can see, and the priest starts to convert the entire town to Christianity, which means that they stop leaving tributes to the nature spirits, and these spirits start to fade and die, leaving everybody vulnerable to a whole host of dangers that they did not know that these spirits were protecting them from. So that's pretty much the gist of this. I can't really say too much because the actual plot does kick in so far into this book, but I gave this 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I love Catherine Arden's writing. It was extremely atmospheric, and the best way I can describe my experience with this book is that I just really loved reading it. This is undoubtedly a very slow book. For the majority of it, we are just following Vasilisa growing up. This is almost a slice of life story story but in a fantasy world for the longest time, and all of those elements are not something that I usually enjoy in a book, but the experience of reading this was just so enjoyable. I loved finding out about the spirits. I really loved Vasilisa as a character. I was rooting for her. I loved how she was challenging all of these sexist norms of this world and trying to carve her own path. This book is also told in multiple perspectives, so we also get the perspective of a couple of Vasilisa's siblings, her stepmother, her father, and the priest. While there were a couple of characters in the story that I really didn't like, I think that they were all well developed. They were all very nuanced. Even the ones that I didn't like, I could very clearly see their motivations, even if I thought they were misguided. I also love the elements of folklore in here. I love the nature spirits. I love the Frost King, which is a character that I did not mention in the synopsis, and that's because it takes so long for him to come about that I can't really explain the circumstances of his arrival. He is mentioned earlier in the story on more than one occasion, but only really becomes a character further towards the end, but I really loved the extra dynamic that added. Catherine Arden writes beautifully, and the world building and character development in this book is what really sold it to me. But while it is slow moving, I really enjoyed the plot of this as well. I am really excited to see where the sequels to this book are going to go, because I know that at least the second one takes place in a very different setting. So more than anything, I'm interested to see how the character of Vasilisa is going to further develop, and also how that new setting, which is going to be in a city, I believe, is going to link up to the wooded northern countryside of this book. But overall, I was very pleasantly surprised how invested in this story I became. I haven't seen many bad reviews for this book, so I thought that I was going to like it. However, I thought that it was going to be very slow going for me, and I thought that it would be boring in parts, but I thoroughly enjoyed every moment I spent reading this story. And I also loved, because of how slow the start was, I was never really sure where the story was actually going. If you like really slow atmospheric stories, or if you like stories that are very fairy tale-esque or rooted in nature magic, then I would definitely recommend that you pick this one up. However, if you are somebody who doesn't really like very slow stories with prosaical writing, then I'm not sure that this one will be for you. And now for the last book that I read in the first half of February, we have The Lord of the Fading Lands by C.L. Wilson. A lot of you guys have been waiting for my review on this book. This is an adult fantasy romance. So something I didn't know going into this is that this is actually a fae romance story, which actually just already makes it 10 times better for me, because I'm a huge fan of Sarah J Maas, so fae romance is definitely something that I am already very familiar with. In this story, we follow Rain Tyrant Soul, who is our male protagonist, and he is the fae king of the Fading Lands. Now, his people are very closely tied to a magical creature called the Tyrant, which is a very large winged cat. These creatures are unfortunately dying out, and for some reason that I'm still not really sure on, if this animal dies out, then so will all of Rain's people. In the Fading Lands, they have something that is similar to a really big crystal ball, and Rain is using it to seek answers to save the Tyrant and save his people. In the Eye of Truth, he sees the human city of Celeria, and he also sees a girl's face, and because of this he ventures to Celeria for the first time in 1,000 years, along with his friend Mauricia, who does make the trip every year. On his way there, he feels a woman in distress reaching out to him, so he races to her side, and there he meets our main female protagonist, Elisetta Barastani, and he quickly discovers that she is his true mate. So that's pretty much where the story starts. In the background of the history and the politics of this world, 1,000 years ago there was something called the Mage Wars, where the Fae went to war with the mages, and the mages actually slaughtered Rain's mate, and because of that he went into a wild frenzy and killed millions of people. While that war was resolved, there has always been bad feeling between the Fae and the mages, and our female protagonist Elisetta has some mysterious circumstances surrounding her birth that leads people to believe that she may have some magical abilities, and we also have some dark mysterious powers rising up in the background and targeting Elisetta, which the Fae believe is dark magic wielded by the mages. I gave this book 4 stars in the end, but it was a roller coaster while I was reading this. So this book actually contains a lot of aspects that I really love and some aspects that I don't love quite so much. This is a historical fantasy romance, and because of that the romance is kind of restricted because we have to abide by things like courting. This world kind of goes by those standards, which is not something that I typically enjoy. It's not for me. I know a lot of people really love that kind of thing, but that is one of the aspects of historical fiction and historical romance that I just really do not get on with. As well as that, we also have the mating bond in here. So as soon as Rain lays eyes on Elisetta in, I think it's the first chapter, he knows that she is his mate, and that just kicks off a whole chain of possessive territorialness and getting angry if anybody goes near her and having her like extremely protected so she can't go anywhere by herself. Those kind of themes are not something that I necessarily dislike. It is just the way that they happened in this book, where the mating bond snapped in straight away, that I disliked. I much prefer it how it's done usually in Sarah J Maas, where the characters have some previous history, or they're friends, or they're already in a relationship before this mating bond snaps into place, because I like the slow burn of the relationship. I like characters getting to know each other as people and the will they won't they vibes before you find out that they're actually meant to be together. Whereas in this book, you find out that they're meant to be together before they even get to know each other. Because of that, through the beginning of this book, I did find it quite cheesy. It was kind of like watching something like the Hercules adaptation or Xena Warrior Princess, which used to be on Channel 5 in the UK really early in the morning. I think it was on a Sunday, and it's that kind of fantasy on a budget kind of vibe. I thought that a lot of the dialogue was cheesy. The Fae can speak to each other in their minds in this book, and it felt like a lazy plot device at first because it wasn't for any other reason than they were Fae. So it felt like instead of finding creative ways or having the characters actually have a discussion, it was just like speaking into each other's mind, and it was really easy to convey information in this. So when I started reading this, I wasn't sure that I was going to like it at all, and that pretty much persisted through the first 100 pages. Then we got to like the 100 to 200 page mark, and I was kind of warming to this book and I thought it was okay, and then by the time I got to the end, I actually ended up really enjoying this. The thing about the romance in this is that while it is instantaneous, it's kind of love at first sight, that is only on the part of Rain. While Elisetta is attracted to him, she has been raised in this historical setting where she very much knows what is proper and how she has to conduct herself, and just falling down in front of random men that drop from the sky and tell you that you're their soulmate is not the done thing. So she is very cautious. She doesn't understand the concept of this mating bond, and so for her the relationship develops a lot slower, and as Rain is respectful of this, the romance does actually move a little bit slower. For the fantasy aspects of this book, I thought that they were good. They're not like the best fantasy aspects I've ever read, but anytime something regarding the conflict would crop up, it was actually making me nervous for what would happen for the characters. By the end of this book, the conflict doesn't really resolve, and I found like the climax of the fantasy aspects a little bit underwhelming in that regard. However, I will be continuing on with this series, so I will obviously see what is actually going to happen there. Something that I did find a little bit odd about this, and I'm not sure if it's something that's common in romance, is that there was a lot of description on Elisetta. I could tell you exactly what she looks like, but Rain, there was very little information on. It was quite a way through the book when I found out that he was muscular. It was quite a way through when I found out that his hair was long and dark, and that just, it was strange for me because at first I wondered if it was something that happened commonly in romance, as these are typically aimed at female readers so that you could kind of project the image of what you find attractive onto the love interest. But then I'm also used to male love interests being described in extreme detail, so you get the picture of this really attractive guy. So I wasn't sure what the deal was with that, and I have to say, behavior wise in this, if I had to compare it to Fae characters that I'm familiar with, Rain kind of reminds me of Tamlin. Now, I don't mean that in a bad way, because I really love ACOTAR. I read it the year it was released, and I really like Tamlin. I still like Tamlin. I kind of treat ACOTAR as a standalone so that I can appreciate that for what it is before everything goes tits up in the sequels. But he does have the good and not the bad, but the good and the questionable aspects of Tamlin in his personality, and I liked that. It's not my favorite kind of character, but I did like Rain. I find him to be a reasonably good love interest. So overall, I would say that this is a success. I did really enjoy this book. I'm very excited to see where the sequels go, because this was the start of their relationship. So while there was quite a bit of romance in here, a lot of it was very tentative, and I'm very interested to see where the relationship is going to go and how it is going to develop in later books. And I'm also really excited to see where the plot is going to go, because in this book the reader actually finds out something that the characters don't know. So I'm very interested to see what's going to happen when they find out the truth, and how that dynamic is going to affect a whole lot of stuff in this book. So that is it for my mid-February wrap up. It was longer than I thought it would be. I didn't think I had a whole lot to say about some of these books, but it seems that I actually did. So please let me know if you have read any of these books and what you thought of them. Please let me know how your February is going reading wise, because mine is going amazing. I'm actually filming this a couple of days in advance of it being posted, and by the actual midpoint of February when this video is going up, I may have actually finished 7 books, which is intense. But that's about it from me today, guys. So please don't forget to like this video if you liked it, and subscribe if you want to. If you head into my description box, you'll find a link to my Goodreads, Instagram and Twitter if you'd like to follow me on any of those, as well as a link to my Bookish body water and candle website, the Instagram for that, and 10% off discount code. That's it from me today, guys. Bye!
Oh, you bite your friend like chocolate. You say you'll go where nobody knows, with guns hidden under our petticoats. We're never gonna quit it, no, we're never gonna quit it, no.